Hello, my name is Christopher Scott. Thanks for joining me for this video, which is part of a series of videos that I'm doing called Basics of the Bible. And in this video, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the Pentateuch, to the Torah, to the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what people often call the Pentateuch. Okay, so first I want to start with the name. Pentateuch is often the word that Protestant evangelicals use to describe those first 5 books of the Bible, Pentateuch. And it comes from 2 Greek words. Penta means 5 in Greek, and then teuchos is a description of a scroll or a case for carrying specific scrolls, right? So literally 5 scrolls or 5 books in one case, if that makes any sense. So Pentateuch. So that's what we Protestants often call the first 5 books of the Bible, Pentateuch. But the Jewish religion often calls it the Torah, which is the Hebrew word for instruction, law, or teaching. The Torah. The Jews have placed a very, very strong emphasis on the Torah in their religion. So in the Jewish religion, there's the 3 main groups of the Old Testament, 3 main groups in their Bible: the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. And within Jewish synagogues, they come up with a specific way they read through the Bible regularly. And the Torah, the entire Torah, is read through every 3 years, while the other sections, the prophets or writings, take much, much longer. They don't put as much emphasis on those readings as they do these 5 books of Moses, the Torah. Okay? And so that's where we get the name, the Pentateuch, if you read it. That's why this video is an introduction to the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses. And why 5 books? It likely was 5 books or 5, scrolls that were written. They were originally written on scrolls, and a scroll could be about 30 feet long. About as long as they could get writings onto a scroll was 30 feet long. They could make longer ones, but it was more difficult. And that was about the maximum amount of information they could get on a scroll was what we have, each of these books. Genesis is pretty long, and so is Deuteronomy. And those books would have filled up about 30 feet of scroll, and that's why we end up having 5 of them. They were meant to be one unit, one section. And if you watch the more videos in this series, when I talk about Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, I'll show you that there's certain connections within the very first verse and the first word of each of those books that connects them to the back. So they were meant to be one unit, one whole that were read together, but they couldn't fit all 5 books onto one scroll, so they were divided up into 5 different scrolls, Pentateuch, which is what we have here. Okay? But we need to also talk about the author. Who wrote these books? They're most likely written by Moses. I shouldn't say most likely. They were written by Moses, and we know that because inside the Pentateuch, it says that Moses wrote the books. The Old Testament, other Old Testament books, and the New Testament both say that Moses wrote the books too. But before we look at that evidence within the Pentateuch and outside of the Pentateuch, I want to talk about how Moses wrote the Pentateuch, because Genesis talks about stuff that happens before Moses, and chapter 34 of Deuteronomy talks about his death, right? So I was reading the Ryrie Study Bible on page 1, talks about this. He says, undoubtedly, Moses had both oral and written records of early history, which he used under the guidance of the Holy Spirit to write about events that antedated his own life. Naturally, someone else must have written the account of his death. So God likely spoke to Moses through the Holy Spirit to write what happened in Genesis, but Moses likely also had some oral records that he had access to and some written down records that he used to write what happened in Genesis. And then someone had to come along a little later and add chapter 34 of Deuteronomy. So Moses did write it, but he didn't literally see everything because Genesis happened before, and then chapter 34 talks about his death. So someone wrote that a little bit later. Now I want to talk to you about the Pentateuch and internal evidence for it. So God chose Moses to reveal God to the nation of Israel. Deuteronomy chapter 34 verse 10 says that God knew Moses face to face. Moses knew God face to face, and God chose himself to reveal himself to Moses. God chose Moses to reveal himself. Most conservative students of the Bible believe that Moses wrote the Pentateuch, and there's internal evidence that Moses wrote the Pentateuch within the Pentateuch, right? There's various direct and indirect mentions within the Pentateuch suggest that Moses was the author. Deuteronomy 31:9 says that Moses wrote the book of instruction. It's pretty clear. There are several other examples within the Pentateuch that Moses was told by God to write things down. Exodus 17:14, Exodus 34:27. Other times it says that Moses wrote things down. He wasn't told to, but he just did. That's Exodus 24:4. And Moses is said to have written the entire body of instruction. Deuteronomy 31:9 and 31:24 say that Moses wrote this entire body of instruction, which likely was the Pentateuch. But there was some of the Pentateuch that was written by the finger of God. So God did directly write that, a small portion, Exodus 31:18. And I have these notes down there in the description if you wanted to print those out or use those for your own study, that I have described for you what I'm saying there. There's also strong indirect internal evidence that Moses wrote the Pentateuch. According to Herbert Wolf in his great book, An Introduction to the Old Testament, Pentateuch, published by Moody Press, he says there is every reason to believe that Moses could have written the book so closely linked to his name. And he gives 3 reasons that Moses likely wrote the Pentateuch. First, Moses' upbringing and training is the first reason. Moses' upbringing and training. As the prince of Pharaoh of Egypt, Moses had special privileges to histories, theories, philosophy, and knowledge that very few other people had. So when we talk about Moses had access to these oral traditions or written traditions about the creation of the world, that might have come through his influence in Egypt as a prince growing up in Egypt. In the New Testament, the writer Luke says that Moses was taught all the wisdom of the Egyptians in Acts 7:22. A second reason that Moses likely wrote the Pentateuch is his 40 years spent in Midian in hiding from Egypt would have enhanced his ability to describe the desert area and the locations there. So if you remember from the book of Exodus, Moses kills a man. He's 40 years old. He kills a man, so he goes to Midian. For 40 years, he lives in the desert, and then he comes back to lead the nation of Israel out of Egypt. So that 40 years in the desert likely gave him a really good grasp and an amazing ability to describe all the different places they go and the places that they wandered around. A third reason that Moses wrote the book of Exodus, or the book of the Pentateuch, is that Moses had a role as a political and religious leader of Israel. If anyone was concerned that the nation of Israel would not forget where they came from, such as that starts in Genesis 12, and what it took to get them to the promised land, it would have been Moses. Like Moses was very concerned to tell the Jewish nation who God was. Genesis chapter 1 through 11 talks about who God was and how he created the world. And then Genesis 12 through Genesis chapter 50 talks about the beginning of the nation of Israel with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses would have been very concerned about that because he was the one taking Israel out of Egypt into the promised land. So that's internal evidence specifically within the Pentateuch, those 5 books. But the rest of the Bible also talks about Moses being the author. And again, I got these notes down there in the description. In the Old Testament, in the late Southern Kingdom history under King Josiah, the priests Hilkiah found the quote-unquote book of the law. He found the book of the law which had been written by Moses. In 2 Chronicles 34:14 says that they found this book of law that they say was written by Moses. This likely was the Pentateuch that they found. A little later, during the exile and the attempt to return to the land to rebuild the temple, It is said that the people wanted to rebuild the temple so that they could offer sacrifices as instructed in the law of Moses. That's Ezra chapter 3, verse 2. A couple chapters later, when the temple is finished, there were priests and Levites divided into groups for service in the temple as described in the law of Moses, Ezra 6:18. There are other references in the Old Testament that specifically say Moses was the author of the Pentateuch. Okay, and I've got those in the description down there. The New Testament also describes Moses as being the author of the Pentateuch. Jesus walks with two men on the road to Emmaus. In Luke chapter 24, Jesus is walking with these two men on the road to Emmaus, and it says that Jesus took those men through the writings of Moses and all of the prophets, likely talking about the Pentateuch, the writings of Moses. This suggests that Moses was the author of the early books of the Bible. In the book of Acts, the author, Luke, quotes Moses in two different places. In Acts chapter 3, verse 22, is a quote from Deuteronomy 18:15. And in Acts 3:23 is a quote from Deuteronomy 18:19 and Leviticus 23:29. And Luke specifically quotes Moses there. Other New Testament references to Moses as the author can be seen in Mark 12:2, John 5:46 and 47, and I got some other ones down there for you. So the Pentateuch was written by Moses, likely between 1446 and 1406, right in there. The Exodus occurred in 1446. Israel enters the Promised Land in 1406 BC. So the Pentateuch was probably written during that period of time. So thanks for watching this brief introduction to the Pentateuch. I know it's pretty basic, but that's part of this series, Basics of the Bible, that I'm doing here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel here and get updates on future videos. You can also get updates on new videos I make by subscribing to my monthly newsletter. There's a link down there in the comments where you can subscribe. I promise to send you one email a month with the latest articles that I have published and the newest videos that I make. Thanks for watching, and I hope to catch you again on another video.